I was standing in a glass-walled boardroom, seconds away from closing a career-defining deal, when the wedding planner called. Her voice trembled as she delivered the message. My family had officially removed me from the guest list. Yet they fully intended to keep the $60,000 I had wire transferred. I didn't scream. I simply realized that if they wanted to erase me from the celebration, I would delete them from the payroll. My name is Everly Lopez, and at 34 years old, I have built my entire life on the ability to detect a lie before it is even fully formed. As the Director of Risk Compliance at Orchid Harbor Capital, my job is not just to read spreadsheets, but to read the silence between the numbers. I was sitting in Conference Room B, a glass box suspended 40 stories above the city, staring down the barrel of a merger that had taken 6 months to engineer. The air in the room smelled of stale espresso and high-stakes anxiety. Across the mahogany table, the CEO of the acquisition target was sweating through his bespoke suit. I had him exactly where I wanted him. My phone buzzed against the polished wood. I usually ignored everything during a closing, but the screen flashed a name that bypassed my professional firewall: Juniper and Lace Events, the wedding planner. My younger sister's wedding was 3 weeks away. I had assumed this call was about the seating chart, or perhaps a frantic, last-minute request for more orchids. I held up a single finger to the room, silencing the lawyers mid-sentence, and answered with the crisp, efficient tone I reserved for billable hours. "This is Everly," I said. There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. In my line of work, a 2-second pause is an admission of guilt. "Ms. Lopez." The planner's voice was thin, reedy, the sound of someone who had drawn the short straw. "I am calling regarding the final guest list for Delaney's wedding." I waited. I did not help her get to the point. "There has been an update," she continued, her voice dropping an octave. "We received instructions this morning from the hosts. Your family has requested that we remove you from the guest list." The words hit me with the physical force of a hull breach. For a moment, the boardroom, the merger, and the city skyline tilted on their axis. I felt a cold prickle of sweat at the base of my neck, but my face remained a mask of bored indifference. I had practiced this face in front of mirrors for a decade. "Remove me," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes." "And the $60,000 I wired to your agency last Tuesday?" I asked. "The funds meant to cover the venue, the catering, and the band?" There was a shuffling of papers on the other end. "That has been processed as a contribution. Your parents informed us that everything had been discussed. They said it was a gift, unconditional." I looked at the CEO across the table. He was watching me, trying to gauge if the deal was falling apart. He had no idea that the real deal, the unspoken contract of blood and loyalty I had signed at birth, had just been shredded. "Send me the itemized breakdown," I said. "I want to see exactly where that $60,000 has been allocated as of this morning." "I cannot do that. Ms. Lopez, the contract is with your parents and the bride. You are a third-party contributor. Confidentiality clauses apply." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. Third party. I was the sister. I was the one who had paid for the dream. And now, I was the third party. I hung up without saying goodbye. The room was silent. I looked at the merger documents in front of me, but my mind was already racing through a different set of data. I opened my laptop. Ignoring the confused glances of my team, I logged into my personal banking portal, my fingers flying across the keys. I pulled up the wire transfer from 7 days ago. I stared at the metadata. There, in the memo field, typed in clear, unambiguous letters: wedding vendor escrow, not gift, not donation. Escrow. In the financial world, escrow implies conditions. It implies a transaction, an exchange of value. It is not charity. My mother had specifically asked me to write something else, something softer. But my instincts, the same instincts that had made me the youngest director in the history of Orchid Harbor, had forced me to add that legal safeguard. I minimized the banking window and opened our internal compliance software. It was a breach of protocol to use company resources for personal matters, but I was not looking for personal validation anymore. I was looking for a paper trail. I ran the merchant code for Juniper and Lace events through our vendor verification system, a tool we use to vet potential partners for money laundering risks. It should have been a clean line, client to vendor. Simple. But on my screen, the line did not go straight. The $60,000 had hit the wedding planner's account, yes, but then it had moved. A significant portion of it had been redirected almost immediately to a secondary entity. I squinted at the screen. The name of the secondary entity flashed in neon blue against the dark interface. Crown and Coil Consulting. I froze. A wedding planner pays florists. They pay caterers. They pay musicians. They do not pay obscure consulting firms with no website and a registered agent address that looked suspiciously like a mail drop in a strip mall. This was not a wedding expense. This was a diversion. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, suddenly slowed down. The hurt, the agonizing, childish pain of being rejected by my own flesh and blood evaporated. In its place, a cold, crystalline clarity took over. They had not just disinvited me, they had stolen from me, and they had done it poorly. I did not call my mother to ask why. I did not text Delaney to beg for an explanation. Those were the actions of a sister, and that role had just been terminated. I opened my secure messaging app and typed two names, Mara Keene, our internal general counsel, and the head of fraud investigations. I typed a single message. I need to verify a signature authority and a payment chain on a private transaction that mimics a corporate redirect scheme. I need you to pull the logs. Immediately. Then, I closed the laptop. I looked up at the CEO across the table. He looked terrified. He thought I had found a hole in his balance sheet. He thought I was about to kill the merger. I uncapped my fountain pen. The ink was black, permanent, and binding. "Let us proceed," I said, my voice steady as a flatline. I signed the documents with a flourish, the scratch of the nib on the paper sounding like a match being struck. I was no longer the daughter who desperately wanted a seat at the table. I was the auditor who was about to close the account for good. They wanted to play games with my name? Fine. I was about to teach them that the only thing more dangerous than a woman scorned is a woman who understands forensic accounting. 7 months ago, I was not sitting in a glass boardroom. I was sitting at a mahogany dining table in a suburb that smelled of cut grass and aggressive normalcy, picking at a piece of pot roast that was dry enough to choke on. It was a Sunday, the kind of obligatory family dinner that felt less like a meal and more like a performance review where I was already aware I would not be getting the promotion. The subject, naturally, was Delaney. My sister sat across from me, glowing with that specific, frantic radiance of a bride-to-be who had spent too much time on Pinterest. She was talking about color palettes, specifically the difference between blush and petal, a distinction that seemed crucial to the structural integrity of her future happiness. My parents watched her with a softness in their eyes that I had never managed to replicate, no matter how many academic awards or quarterly bonuses I brought home. "Delaney is just so reasonable," my mother said, pouring herself a second glass of Chardonnay. She looked at me, her gaze sharpening just a fraction as it traveled over my tailored blazer. Not like some people who have to analyze everything to death. Delaney just flows. I took a sip of water. The water was warm. I am a risk compliance director. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "my job is to analyze things so other people do not go to prison." My father grunted from the head of the table. He was cutting his meat with unnecessary force. "We know what you do. Everly, you are good with numbers, but you are married to your spreadsheets. It makes you hard, difficult to approach." I placed my fork down. Hard. That was the word they always used. It was their polite shorthand for ungrateful or unyielding. They did not see the long hours I worked to ensure my own stability, or the checks I sent them every Christmas. They only saw a daughter who did not need them. And for parents who thrived on dependency, my independence was an insult. Then came the pivot, The conversation shifted from Delaney's emotional superiority to the financial reality of the wedding. "Everything is just costing so much more than we budgeted," Delaney said, her voice wobbling. "The venue raised their catering minimums by 15% last week, and the band wants a deposit that is double what we planned." My mother patted Delaney's hand. "We will figure it out. Sweetheart, maybe we can cut the flowers back, or use a DJ instead of a live band." I saw the look on Delaney's face. It was pure devastation. She had been dreaming of a live jazz quartet since she was 12. "I can help," I said. The table went silent. "I can cover the difference," I continued, looking at my father. "I received my quarterly bonus last week. It is not an issue. I want Delaney to have the band." My father waved his hand in the air, a dismissive gesture that swatted my offer away like a persistent fly. "You do not need to get involved. Everly, you are busy. We do not want to burden you with family matters when you have your important career to worry about." It was not a kindness, it was a boundary. He was telling me that my money was welcome in the abstract, but my participation was not. He wanted me to be the invisible financier, the safety net that nobody acknowledged. I stayed silent for the rest of the meal. I watched them comfort Delaney, promising her the world while calculating how to pay for it on a napkin. I drove back to the city that night with a hollow feeling in my chest. The kind of loneliness that comes from being in a room full of people who share your DNA, but none of your reality. I sat down at my computer in my apartment at midnight. I pulled up my banking interface. I was not going to let Delaney settle for a DJ. I was not going to let her look back on her wedding day and remember the things she had to sacrifice because our parents were too proud to accept my help openly. I initiated a transfer for $60,000, but I was still Everly Lopez. I was still the woman who looked for the trapdoor in every contract. I did not just send cash. I set up a milestone escrow arrangement through a third-party service integrated with my bank. The terms were simple in my head. The funds were to be released only upon the submission of valid invoices from approved vendors. It was a way to ensure the money went to the wedding, not to my parents' renovation projects or my brother-in-law's bad investments. I typed in the details. I was about to hit send when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "I know you are going to send money because you cannot help yourself. Please do not make this a business transaction. It embarrasses your father." I stared at the screen. I had the cursor hovering over the memo line. I had intended to type vendor escrow, Delaney wedding, phase 1. It was precise. It was legal. It was safe. But I hesitated. I thought about the dinner. I thought about the way they looked at me. Cold, hard, unfeeling. I wanted, just for once, to be the daughter who gave freely. I wanted to be the sister who was soft. Just put it as a gift. The second text came through. "Don't make Delaney sign things. It ruins the joy." My finger hovered over the keyboard. This was the moment. The compliance officer in my brain was screaming that this was a vulnerability, a breach of protocol. If I labeled it a gift, I lost leverage. If I labeled it a gift, the legal definition of the transfer changed. But I was tired of fighting. I was tired of being the difficult one. I deleted vendor escrow. I typed family wedding gift in the recipient message field, though I kept the internal banking category as escrow/trust. It was a half measure, a compromise. I pressed confirm. The screen flashed green. Transfer successful. I sat back in my chair, looking at the city lights outside my window. I told myself I had done the right thing. I told myself that by removing the strings, I was proving my love. I told myself that family was different from business, that blood was a sufficient contract. That was the first crack in the foundation. That was the moment I handed them the weapon they would eventually use to execute me. I thought silence was love. I thought that by not imposing my rules, I was showing them grace. But looking back now, I realize the truth. Silence is not love. Silence is simply the empty space where other people get to rewrite your contribution until it belongs to them. I went to sleep that night thinking I had saved my sister's wedding. I had no idea I had just funded my own erasure. The PDF from Juniper and Lace arrived in my inbox with a cheerful ping that belied the rot hidden inside its metadata. I opened it on my second monitor, expanding the window until the spreadsheet filled the screen. In my line of work, you learn that chaos has a texture. Fraud is usually messy, full of jagged edges and panicked corrections. But this document? This was clean. It was too clean. The formatting was pristine. The columns aligned with military precision, and the font was a calming, professional sans serif. It was a document designed to soothe, to assure the reader that everything was under control and there was no need to look closer. That was the first red flag. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the line items. Every legitimate financial breakdown has a rhythm. Venue deposit, check. Catering down payment, check. Floral retainer, check. These are standard. They have corresponding contract codes, vendor tax identification numbers, and clear dates of service. But as I scrolled down, the rhythm broke. Interspersed between the florist and the photographer were rows labeled simply as miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is the junk drawer of accounting. In a corporate audit, a miscellaneous line item over $500 triggers an automatic flag. Here, I saw 3 of them, each for exactly $4,900, just under the $5,000 threshold that usually triggers a mandatory structured reporting requirement in banking software. That was not an accident. That was structuring. Someone knew where the tripwires were and had carefully stepped over them. And then I saw it, buried near the bottom. Under the section for Day of Coordination was a line item that made no sense. Coordination retainer, Crown and Coyle Consulting. The amount was substantial, $12,000. I frowned. I knew every major wedding vendor in the tri-state area. Delaney had spent months sending me links to their portfolios. I knew the difference between a high-end florist and a budget DJ. But Crown and Coyle Consulting? It sounded like a hedge fund or a law firm, not a company that draped tulle over chairs. I highlighted the name and switched to my forensic tools. I ran a search on the business entity. If this was a legitimate vendor, they would have a digital footprint. They would have an Instagram page full of blushing brides, a website with pricing packages, and reviews on wedding forums. The search returned nothing. No website, no social media, no reviews. I switched databases to the State Business Registry. Crown and Coyle Consulting had been incorporated 6 weeks ago. The registered agent was a generic legal service. The business address listed was a suite number in a commercial park on the edge of town. I pulled up the satellite view on maps. It was not a bridal studio. It was a strip mall containing a dry cleaner, a vape shop, and a pack-and-ship store. Suite 204 was a mailbox rental. My stomach turned over. This was a shell company. It had no employees, no inventory, and no history. It existed for one purpose only: to catch money and move it somewhere else. I went back to my banking portal. Because the funds had originated from my account, I had the right to trace the transaction path through the clearinghouse. I pulled up the wire transfer I had sent to Juniper and Lace. I watched the digital breadcrumbs. My $60,000 had landed in the planner's escrow account on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, a transfer of $12,000 was authorized from that account directly to Crown and Coyle. It was a redirect, a classic skimming operation. I picked up the phone and dialed the wedding planner again. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight. "Ms. Lopez, I really cannot discuss this further without your parents' permission." "I am not asking for permission," I said, my voice dropping to the register I used when interviewing embezzlement suspects. "I am asking about a specific vendor on your ledger. Crown and Coyle Consulting. Who are they?" There was a silence on the line. A long, heavy silence. "They are a subcontractor," she said finally. "For logistics." "Logistics," I repeated. "For a wedding. What kind of logistics require a $12,000 retainer to a company that was formed last month and operates out of a mailbox rental?" She stammered, Your parents specifically requested them. They said Crown and Coyle was handling the private security and transport. They told me to route the payment there. They said it was a preferred vendor." I closed my eyes for a second. Private security? For a wedding in a botanical garden. I need to see the contract. I said, I need to see the agreement between Juniper and Lace and Crown and Coil. And I need to see the authorization signature that allowed you to release funds from the escrow account to this entity. The silence stretched again. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I will have to locate the file. She said, You do that. I said, and while you are looking, you might want to check your liability insurance, because dispersing escrow funds to an unverified shell company without proper due diligence is not just bad practice, it is negligence. I did not hang up this time. I waited while she scrambled on the other end. I could hear the frantic clicking of a mouse. I kept digging while she looked. I pulled up the communication log attached to the transaction in the planner's shared portal, a feature she had forgotten to revoke my access to. I found the email authorizing the payment. It was dated 3 days ago. The subject line was urgent. Vendor payment instruction. The body of the email was brief. Please expedite the retainer for Crown and Coil immediately to secure the date. Use the funds from Everly's contribution. She is aware and approves. It was signed, Mom. But I looked closer at the sender's address. My mother's email address was Elizabeth, Lopez Provider, net. The email on the screen was Elizabeth, Lopez Provider, net. There was an extra S at the end of the name. It was subtle. If you were a busy wedding planner scanning your inbox on a phone screen, you would never notice it. It was a spoof, a deliberate, calculated forgery designed to look like a family instruction while masking the true origin. I stared at that extra S. My mother was not tech-savvy enough to spoof an email address. She typed with 2 fingers and still signed her text messages. She did not know how to register a shell company or set up a business bank account for a fake consulting firm. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who knew the budget, knew my contribution, and knew exactly how to pressure a wedding planner into bypassing protocol. The planner came back on the line, her voice trembling. Ms. Lopez, I am sending the contract now, but please, your father was very insistent. I did not answer. The email with the attachment landed in my inbox. I opened it. The contract for Crown and Coil was a joke. It was a single page. Generic boilerplate text that looked like it had been downloaded from a free legal template site. No scope of work, no deliverables, just a demand for payment. And at the bottom, the authorizing signature. It was a scrawl that attempted to look like my mother's. But the slant was wrong. It leaned to the left. My mother was right-handed and wrote with a heavy looping slant to the right. This was not a wedding dispute. This was not about guest lists or seating charts or flowers. I sat back in my chair, the cold light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. They had disinvited me because I was the only one who would have checked the receipts. They needed me gone so they could finish draining the account. I looked at the spoofed email again. I am not looking at a family drama. I whispered to the empty office. I am looking at wire fraud. Mara Keene, the general counsel for Orchid Harbor, sat across from me in my office, her silhouette framed by the darkening skyline. She held the printout of the Crown and Coil transaction as if it were a contaminated specimen. Mara was a woman who viewed the world through the lens of liability. To her, a family dispute was just a lawsuit that had not been filed yet. This is not just a breach of contract. Everly, she said, tossing the page onto the glass table. If this money was designated for specific vendors and was redirected to a shell entity without your express, written consent, we are looking at conversion. In criminal terms, it is theft by deception. I looked at the document. Theft. It was a heavy word to apply to people whose birthdays I had memorized. I do not want to file charges yet, I said, leaning back in my chair. If I go nuclear, I lose the high ground. I look like the vindictive sister ruining the wedding. Then what is your play? Mara asked. I want to squeeze the supply line. I said, I want to remind them who actually controls the oxygen in the room. I opened my laptop and drafted a standard corporate document. A notice of verification. In the compliance world, this is a pause button. It tells all parties that a transaction is under review and that no further funds will be released until the audit is complete. It is bureaucratic, it is dry, and it is absolutely crippling to a timeline-sensitive event like a wedding. I sent it to every vendor on the distribution list, the florist, the caterer, the venue, and of course, Juniper and Lace, to all concerned parties. I typed, "Due to an irregularity in the disbursement schedule regarding the escrowed funds, all future payments are effectively frozen pending a full signature audit. Please suspend services until confirmation of authorized payer status is received." I hit send. The reaction was immediate. It started with the venue manager replying to ask if the tasting scheduled for Friday was still covered. Then the florist emailed to say the wholesale order for the hydrangeas was on hold. Then, 30 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. I needed a record. I needed to hear exactly what he would say when he realized the ATM had just eaten his card. When I played the message back, his voice was distorted by rage, the kind of volume that peaks the microphone. "Everly, I do not know what kind of game you are playing, but you better unfreeze that account immediately. The planner is saying checks are bouncing. You are embarrassing us. If you do not release those funds by tomorrow morning, I am going to talk to a lawyer about tortious interference. You cannot breach a contract just because you are jealous. Tortious interference." He had probably Googled that phrase 5 minutes before calling. I saved the voicemail. I did not call him back. Instead, I sent a text. "I am not interfering. I am enforcing the escrow terms. The funds were for verified wedding vendors. Crown & Coyle is not a verified vendor. Once I verify the authorization for that $12,000 transfer, the rest of the funds will be unlocked." I knew that would trigger the next move, and sure enough, 20 minutes later, an email arrived from Juniper and Lace, Ms. Lopez. The planner wrote, "Attached. Please find the authorization form signed by you, approving the use of funds for Crown & Coyle Consulting as a discretionary expense. We consider this matter resolved." I opened the attachment. It was a PDF scan of a printed document. At the bottom of the page, above the line marked Contributor, was a signature, Everly Lopez. I zoomed in. It looked like my signature. It had the sharp loop on the E and the long tail on the Z. To a casual observer, to a wedding planner, it looked perfect. But I was not a casual observer. I was a woman who signed $100 million compliance briefs. I looked at the stroke weight. The signature was too thick, too uniform. It lacked the natural pressure variation of a pen moving across paper. It looked traced, or stamped. I right-clicked on the file and opened the metadata properties. Digital files have DNA. They tell you where they were born. If I had signed this, the metadata would show a DocuSign encryption key or a timestamp from my iPad. Instead, the creator field read, "Canon image, runner advance, print station 04. The location field was even more damning. Copy corner, Main Street branch. I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest, displacing the anger. Copy corner was a print shop 3 blocks from my parents' house. They had not just redirected the money, they had physically forged my signature. They had gone to a print shop, likely with an old birthday card or a check I had written, and they had cut and pasted my name onto a fraudulent contract, scanned it, and sent it to the planner to cover their tracks. This was not just family drama anymore. This was a felony. I picked up the phone and called the planner. "Ms. Lopez," she answered, sounding relieved. "I assume you received the document?" "I did." I said, "I am looking at it right now. I have a question about the chain of custody. Was this signed in your presence?" "Well, no." She hesitated. "Your sister brought it in. She said you signed it over the weekend when you visited." "I have not visited in 3 weeks." I said. There was a long silence. "I want the original." I said, "I want the physical piece of paper that was scanned. And I want the access logs for your payment portal to see who uploaded it." "Ms. Lopez, is there a problem?" "There is a significant problem." I said, my voice ice. "You have accepted a forged authorization for a $12,000 disbursement. That makes you liable. Unless you want to be named as a co-conspirator in a fraud investigation, you will send me those logs." Now, I hung up. I turned the laptop around so Mara could see the screen. I pointed to the metadata. They went to a copy shop. Mara, I said, they actually went to a copy shop to fake my consent. Mara looked at the screen, then at me. Her expression softened. Just for a moment. Everly, this is aggressive, even for them. They do not think it is aggressive, I said. Staring at the fake signature, they think it is their right. They think my name belongs to them just as much as my money does. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below was moving. Thousands of people going about their lives, making honest transactions. Do you want to stop the wedding? Mara asked quietly. We can file an injunction. We can shut the whole thing down by noon tomorrow. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked tired, but I also looked resolved. No, I said, I do not want to ruin the wedding. That is what they expect. They expect me to be the villain who throws a tantrum. I turned back to her. I want them to sweat. I want them to realize that the Bank of Everly is closed. I do not want to destroy their party. Mara, I want to destroy the habit they have of treating me like a wallet with a pulse. I sat back down and opened a new email draft. To Mom, Dad, Delaney. Subject: Signature verification required. Attached is a document claiming to be signed by me. Since I was in New York on the date this file was created at the copy corner on Main Street, I am confused as to how my signature appeared on it. I have paused all vendor payments until this is explained. If this is not clarified within 24 hours, I will have to assume my identity has been compromised and file a police report for fraud. I hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. Once I sent this, there was no going back to the quiet, resentful peace we had maintained for years. I clicked send. Let them panic. I thought, let them see what happens when the difficult daughter decides to finally live up to the name. The reception desk at Orchid Harbor Capital is designed to intimidate. It is a slab of polished marble manned by security personnel who look like they retired from the Secret Service yesterday. So when my assistant messaged me that there was a disturbance in the lobby, I knew exactly what, or rather, who, it was. I took the elevator down. The doors slid open to reveal a scene that made my stomach tighten, not with fear, but with a profound, exhausting embarrassment. My parents were standing near the turnstiles. My father's face a mottled red as he gestured aggressively at the head of security. My mother was weeping into a tissue, a performance aimed at the young receptionist, and behind them stood Delaney, looking like a ghost in a designer tracksuit, her eyes darting around the sleek, silent lobby as if looking for an exit. Everly, my father shouted when he saw me. His voice echoed off the limestone walls, causing a group of visiting investors to turn and stare. You come down here and tell these people who we are. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. I walked over to the security officer, gave him a curt nod, and swiped my badge. Let them through. I said, we are going upstairs. My father spat, adjusting his jacket as if he had won a victory. We are going to settle this. I led them into the elevator in silence. The ride to the 40th floor takes 45 seconds. In that time, nobody spoke. The air was thick with the smell of my mother's floral perfume and my father's anger. When the doors opened, I did not take them to my private office where they could scream in privacy. I took them to Conference Room A, the glass fishbowl visible to the entire trading floor. Sit, I said. They sat. My mother looked at the panoramic view of the city and sniffed disdainfully. My father slapped his hand on the table. Unfreeze the accounts. Everly, now. You are ruining your sister's week. You are being petty because we made a decision about the guest list that was best for the family dynamic. I did not answer him. I plugged my laptop into the console in the center of the table. The projector hummed to life, and a large, high-definition image filled the wall behind me. It was not a wedding mood board. It was a forensic timeline. What is this? Delaney asked, her voice small. This is the reality of your wedding. Delaney, I said. I clicked a button. The first slide appeared. It showed the wire transfer of $60,000 from my account to Juniper and Lace. I paid for this wedding. I said calmly, not Mom and Dad. Me. The money they claimed was from a home equity loan? That was my bonus. Delaney looked at our parents. Mom? You said Dad handled it. My mother waved her hand dismissively. It is all family money. Delaney, it does not matter which account it comes from. Everly is just trying to make you feel guilty. I clicked again. The screen changed to show the email chain. The request to redirect $12,000 to Crown and Coyle Consulting. The spoofed email address with the extra S. The fake signature on the authorization form. The metadata proving it was created at a copy shop. This is not family money moving around, I said, looking directly at my father. This is forgery. This is wire fraud. You created a shell company to siphon off 20% of the budget before the first flower was even ordered. My father's face went from red to a pale, sickly gray. That was a handling fee, he muttered. For the trouble. We are managing everything. We deserve to be compensated for the stress. Compensated? I repeated. You stole $12,000 from your daughter's wedding budget, and when I caught you, you tried to cut me out of the event so I would not notice. My mother stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. We did it to protect you, she cried, her voice rising to a pitch that drew glances from the traders outside the glass. We knew if you were involved, you would want to control everything. You would turn the wedding into a spreadsheet. We just wanted Delaney to be happy without you hovering over every receipt. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. No pain, no desire to please, just cold, hard clarity. No, I said, you did not do it because I like control. You did it because you wanted the credit. You wanted to stand in that receiving line and have everyone tell you how generous you are, while spending my money and forging my name. Delaney was staring at the screen. She looked physically ill. The timeline was undeniable. The dates, the times, the IP addresses. It was a map of betrayal. I did not know, she whispered. Everly, I swear. They told me you were too busy. They said you were relieved not to come. They said the guest list was tight and you offered to give up your spot. I looked at my sister. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was just the innocent beneficiary of their greed. But then her phone buzzed on the mahogany table. It was placed face up. We all looked at it. A message notification popped up on the lock screen. The font was large enough for me to read from where I stood. Grant, did you fix it? Just make sure she stays gone. If your sister shows up, she will turn everything into work. We need that cash flow. The room went dead silent. Delaney reached for the phone, her hand trembling, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air like smoke. We need that cash flow. I looked at Delaney. Her face was a mask of horror, but not at me. She was looking at the phone as if it were a bomb. So, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream, it is not just Mom and Dad. Delaney looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Grant said he just wanted the day to be relaxed. He said you make people nervous. He does not care about my personality, Delaney. I said, he cares about the audit. He knows that if I am there, I will ask questions. He knows that if I am looking at the invoices, he cannot use your wedding as a slush fund. I walked over to the screen and unplugged the HDMI cable. The image of the fraud vanished, leaving only the reflection of a broken family in the black glass. I am not unfreezing the account, I said, and I am not coming to the wedding. But not because you uninvited me, because I refuse to finance a lie. Delaney stood up. She looked at our parents, who were now refusing to meet her eyes. She looked at her phone, where her fiancé was waiting for confirmation that the cash flow was secure. Then she looked at me. For the first time in her life, she did not look at me like the big sister who fixed things. She looked at me like the only person in the room who was telling her the truth. She grabbed her purse and walked out of the conference room without a word. My father started to shout after her, but I stepped in his path. Get out, I said, before I have security escort you out. And Dad, if you try to forge my signature again, I will not call a wedding planner. I will call the district attorney. I watched them leave, retreating into the elevator like cornered animals. I stood alone in the glass box, surrounded by the silence of the 41st floor. I had lost my family. Yes. But looking at the empty chair where Delaney had sat, I realized I might have just started the process of saving my sister. The text message from Delaney arrived at 6 in the morning. It was short, lowercase, and stripped of all the bubbly emojis she usually used to punctuate her life. Her text read, "Meet me at the grinding stone. 8 a.m. Please come alone. No mom. No Grant." The grinding stone was a coffee shop 3 towns over. A place with chipped ceramic mugs and insufficient lighting, far removed from the country club circuit our parents frequented. It was a place where nobody would recognize the Lopez sisters. And right now, anonymity was the only luxury we could afford. I arrived 10 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee for myself and a vanilla latte with oat milk for Delaney, her order since she was 16. When she walked in, the bell above the door chimed. But she didn't look up. She looked like a woman who had walked through a hurricane. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed with the kind of red that no amount of concealer could hide, and she was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that I recognized from her college days. She looked young, vulnerable, and completely dismantled. She slid into the booth opposite me. I pushed the latte toward her. She wrapped her hands around the mug as if it were the only solid thing in the world. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was cracked. I didn't start with an apology, and I didn't start with an accusation. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. It wasn't the thick binder of forensic evidence I had used in the boardroom. This was different. This was just 3 sheets of paper. I slid the folder across the scratched wooden table. "I am not here to say I told you so," I said softly. "I am here because you need to see what I found when I stopped looking at the money and started looking at the people." Delaney opened the folder. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. She stared at the first page, which was a zoomed-in capture of the vendor list I had pulled from the wedding planner's portal, Crown and Coyle Consulting. She read aloud. The name tasted foreign in her mouth. "Everly. I swear to you, I have never heard of this company. I thought Mom said it was for the shuttle buses. She told me the transport company had a corporate name." I shook my head. "It is not a transport company. Delaney, I checked the Department of Transportation records. Crown and Coyle has no fleet, no commercial insurance, and no drivers." "Then what is it?" she asked, looking up at me. Her eyes were pleading. "Why would Mom and Dad move $12,000 to a company that doesn't exist?" "They didn't move it," I said. "They authorized it, but they didn't pick the name." I motioned for her to turn the page. The second document was a public record from the county clerk's office. It was a civil court filing, dated 4 months ago. "Grant," I said. Delaney flinched at his name. "What about him?" she asked defensively. "He is stressed. Everly. He is trying to launch his startup. He barely sleeps." "I know." I said, "I know he is stressed. But do you know why?" She stayed silent. I pointed to the highlighted section of the court document. Grant's startup. Vantage Point Logistics is not just struggling, Delaney, it is insolvent. He is being sued by 2 separate suppliers for breach of contract and unpaid debts totaling $45,000. He has a judgment against him that is about to go into garnishment. Delaney stared at the numbers. $45,000. She looked up at me, confusion warring with denial, but he told me they were just having cash flow issues. He said it was normal for a new business. He said once the wedding was over, he would have new investors. I turned to the third and final page. This was the corporate registration for Crown and Coyle Consulting. I pointed to the address of the registered agent. "Look at the address." "Delaney." She squinted. 412 Oak Street, apartment 4B. "That is not an office." I said, "That is a residential apartment in the city." "Do you know who lives there?" She shook her head. "Grant's cousin lives there." I said, "The one he calls Mikey, the one who supposedly works in import-export." The air seemed to leave the booth. Delaney slumped back against the vinyl seat, the connection finally snapping into place in her mind. Grant set up crown and coil. She whispered. I nodded. He used Mom and Dad, I explained. He told them he needed a way to handle discreet expenses for the wedding to take the pressure off you. He probably fed them some story about needing to pay vendors in cash to get a discount. Mom and Dad loved the idea because it made them feel like insiders, like they were managing the show. They didn't know they were laundering money. They just thought they were being clever. Delaney covered her mouth with her hand. A sob escaped, a sharp, jagged sound that made the barista look over. He is stealing from us, she said. He is stealing the wedding money to pay off his business debts. I leaned forward. He is not just stealing the money. Delaney, he is stealing your start. He wanted to use the wedding gifts, the cash envelopes, and my $60,000 to bail himself out. That text message I saw on your phone, when he said, "We need the cash flow," he wasn't talking about paying for flowers. He was talking about staying out of bankruptcy court. Delaney looked down at her engagement ring. It was a modest diamond, one she had gushed over because Grant had told her it was a family heirloom. Now, in the harsh light of the morning, I wondered if that was a lie too. I felt a surge of protective rage, not at my sister, but for her. She had been the golden child. Yes, but that just meant she was the prize. She was the asset everyone else was trying to leverage. Our parents wanted the social capital of a lavish wedding. Grant wanted the actual capital of the wedding budget. And Delaney? Delaney just wanted to get married. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cold. You have a choice, I said. My voice was steady, anchoring her. She looked at me, her eyes wide and terrified. What choice? I can't. The invitations are out. The guests are coming in 2 weeks. Everyone thinks, stop, I said. Forget everyone. Forget Mom and Dad. Forget the guests. I squeezed her hand. You have a choice. You can go through with this wedding as it is now. You can let them use you as a cover for a financial rescue mission. You can say, I do to a man who views you as a liquidity event. I paused, letting the reality sink in. Or, I said, you can decide that you are worth more than $60,000. You can decide that you want a marriage, not a merger. Delaney wiped her face with her sleeve. The fabric came away stained with mascara. If I stop it, if I cancel, Mom will die. Dad will never forgive me. And Grant will be angry because he got caught. I said, not because he lost you. That was the hardest thing to say. But I had promised myself no more lies. Delaney took a long, shuddering breath. She looked at the file again. The shell company, the lawsuit, the address, the evidence of a love that was conditional on a bank transfer. Then she looked at me. Everly, she said. Her voice was small, but it wasn't shaking anymore. Yes? I don't know how to stop it. She said, I don't know how to fight them. They are so loud, and I'm just me. I smiled, a genuine, sad smile. You are not just you, I said. You are a Lopez, and right now, you are sitting across from the best risk compliance officer in the city. Delaney turned her hand over and gripped mine. Her fingers were strong. Help me, she said. I nodded. I don't want the money, Everly, she said, and her eyes were fierce for the first time. I don't care about the $60,000 anymore. I don't care about the flowers or the band. What do you want? I asked. She squeezed my hand tight, like she was holding on for dear life. I want the truth, she said. I want to know who they really are, and I want you to help me expose them. Not for the money, but so I can walk away clean. I looked at my little sister. She wasn't the spoiled bride anymore. She was a woman waking up from a long, expensive dream. Okay, I said. We are going to burn it down. But we are going to do it my way, with receipts. For the first time in years, we weren't rivals. We weren't the smart one and the pretty one. We were partners. And God help the man who had tried to play us both. Mara Keene sat on the edge of my desk, swinging a leg back and forth with the predatory rhythm of a metronome. She held the draft of the email I had prepared, a red pen in her hand ready to strike, but she wasn't editing for grammar. She was editing for Psychological Impact. "You are still trying to be the police. Everly," she said, tossing the paper back to me. "You are demanding they confess. They will never confess if you come at them with a baton. You have to give them a way out." I looked at the screen. My draft was full of accusations and demands for immediate repayment. It was angry. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Give them a shovel," Mara said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "And tell them it is a ladder." She pulled up a fresh document and began to type. The strategy was elegant in its cruelty. We would not demand the return of the $12,000 immediately. Instead, we would offer a compromise. I would agree to unfreeze a portion of the remaining escrow account, enough to pay the caterer and the band, on one condition. They had to sign a vendor verification affidavit. It sounded like boring, standard compliance paperwork. It looked like the kind of bureaucratic hoop a risk officer would make people jump through just to be annoying. But hidden in the clauses were 3 specific traps. First, the signers had to list exactly who authorized the redirect to Crown and Coil. Second, they had to declare who the ultimate beneficiary of that company was. And third, and most importantly, they had to accept full personal liability for any funds found to be misappropriated. "If they are innocent," Mara said, "they will sign it because they want the money released. If they are guilty, they will sign it because they think you are just being a stickler for paperwork and they are arrogant enough to believe they can lie on a legal document without consequences." I sent the email at 2 p.m. I kept the tone defeated. I am tired of fighting. I wrote, "I just need to close out the compliance audit on my end so I do not get flagged by my own department. Please sign the attached verification so I can release the next $20,000 to the caterer." The response came in 11 minutes. My father didn't even read it. I could tell by the timestamp on the digital signature. He opened the document, scrolled to the bottom, and clicked, "I agree." He signed as the primary authorizer. In the section asking for the purpose of Crown and Coil, he typed, "Logistical support and security." He thought he was clearing a hurdle. In reality, he had just put his name on a federal wire fraud confession. But then came the twist I had not expected. The document required a secondary witness signature for any third-party consultant involved. My father must have forwarded the email to Grant, assuming that since it was Grant's shell company, he should handle the details. Grant signed it, but Grant was careless. In the field labeled Vendor Representative Relationship, instead of leaving it blank or writing none, he panicked. He must have thought he needed to validate the company to make it look real. So he signed his name, and next to it, he checked the box for authorized agent. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Grant had just legally confirmed that he was an agent for Crown and Coil Consulting. He had just drawn a straight, undeniable line between himself and the shell company that was billing his own wedding. He had proved the conflict of interest. He had proved the kickback. I saved the file. I backed it up to 3 different servers. Then my phone rang. It was Juniper and Lace. The wedding planner sounded different this time. Gone was the hesitation. In its place was the frantic, high-pitched tone of a woman who realized she was standing in the middle of a blast zone without a helmet. "Ms. Lopez," she said, breathless, "I received your copy of the affidavit. I spoke to my own legal counsel." "Smart move," I said. She continued, rushing the words out. "My lawyer advised me that if I am holding information regarding the unauthorized use of escrow funds, I could be liable for aiding and abetting. I do not want that. Ms. Lopez, I run a clean business. Then send me what you have." I said, "Check your inbox." A file appeared. It was an audio log. Call recording. Client ID 4099, Lopez/Miller Wedding. Date, February 4th. I put on my noise-canceling headphones. The world outside my office fell away. I clicked play. The audio was crisp. I heard the planner's voice first. Polite and professional. "Mr. Lopez, I just want to confirm. Removing Everly from the guest list is a significant change. Usually, we do not exclude immediate family unless there is a security concern. And regarding the payment, she is the primary payer on the account. Then, My father's voice cut through the static. It was deep, booming. The voice he used when he was ordering a waiter to send back a steak. Listen to me. Everly is a transaction. She pays, but she does not participate. That is the arrangement. There was a pause on the recording. But, sir, if she is paying, she might expect an invitation. My father laughed. It was a short, dry bark of a laugh. She has money. She does not need an invitation. She buys her way into things because she has no personality to keep her there. Just take the money, cut the invite, and route the rest to the consultant like I told you. She will never know. She is too busy looking at her spreadsheets to notice she is not wanted. The recording ended. I sat in the silence of my office. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the floor. She is a transaction. I had known they used me. I had known they preferred Delaney. But hearing my father dismiss my entire existence as a financial utility, hearing him laugh about erasing me while spending my earnings, it did something to me. It cauterized the wound. I did not cry. Crying implies surprise. Crying implies hope. I had neither. I saved the audio file into a folder named The Final Round. I would not release it yet. This was not a warning shot. This was the bullet you save for the execution. Meanwhile, the poison I had injected into the system was starting to spread. Delaney was doing exactly what we had discussed. She was at my parents' house for dinner, playing the role of the stressed bride, but with a new, sharp edge. She texted me updates from under the table. I just asked Mom why we needed a security consultant for a garden wedding. She dropped a plate, literally dropped it. I asked Grant if he knew the guys at Crown & Coyle. He got red and said I was asking stupid questions and that I should focus on my dress. They were cracking. The pressure of the signature, combined with the frozen funds, was making them turn on each other. And outside the house, the noise was getting louder. The wedding industry is small. Vendors talk. The florist had told the baker that payment was on hold. The baker had told the rental company. The phrase fraud verification was being whispered in group chats and vendor forums. Nobody was saying canceled. That would have been a tragedy. They were saying investigation. That was a scandal. Rumors began to swirl that the Lopez family wasn't the wealthy suburban dynasty they pretended to be. People were whispering that the checks were bouncing not because of a bank error, but because there was no money to begin with. My phone buzzed again. It was a voicemail from my mother. Everly, I don't know what you are doing, but the florist just called and said she cannot order the peonies until the hold is lifted. You are embarrassing us. People are talking. Fix this. Her voice was high, shrill, and terrified. I didn't call her back. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. For 34 years, I had been the one who was afraid of disappointing them, afraid of being left out, afraid of not being enough. But as I looked at the signed affidavit on one screen and the audio file on the other, I realized the balance had shifted. They weren't angry anymore. They were scared. They were scared because for the first time in their lives, I wasn't the daughter who cried in her room. I was the director of risk compliance. And I didn't have feelings. I had a file. The court of public opinion does not require evidence. It only requires a good story. And my parents, realizing they were losing the battle of the bank ledger, decided to win the war of the narrative. It started on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to a barrage of notifications, not from my team at Orchid Harbor, but from distant relatives and high school acquaintances I had not spoken to in a decade. My feed was flooded with vague, passive-aggressive posts from my mother about ungrateful children and the pain of jealousy destroying a family celebration. Then came the article. The Harbor Line Gazette is a local digital rag that survives on advertisements for car dealerships and gossip disguised as community news. The headline was buried in the lifestyle section, but it was written with the precision of a targeted strike. Local Wedding of the Year hit by last-minute vendor snags amidst family feud. The article did not name me directly, but it didn't have to. It quoted an anonymous source, undoubtedly my mother, claiming that a disgruntled family member was holding the event hostage over financial control issues. It painted a picture of a bitter, lonely spinster sister who, unable to find her own happiness, was intent on sabotaging her radiant younger sister's big day. I sat in my office, drinking my third espresso, reading the comments. Some people just can't stand to see others happy. One user wrote, "Money ruins everything. Shame on the sister." Wrote another. My hand hovered over the keyboard. The instinct to fight back, to type out a furious paragraph detailing the shell company and the forged signature, was overwhelming. I wanted to post the screenshots. I wanted to burn them down with the truth right there in the comments section. But I stopped. In risk management, we have a rule. Never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty. But the pig likes it. My parents wanted a screaming match. They wanted me to look emotional, hysterical, and unstable. If I reacted with anger, I proved their point. I closed the browser tab. I opened a blank document. I wrote 2 sentences. Regarding the ongoing inquiries about the Lopez-Miller wedding, there is currently a standard compliance dispute regarding the verification of vendor identities and authorized payment channels. All parties are cooperating with the necessary audit procedures to ensure financial transparency. I posted it to my LinkedIn and tagged the wedding planner. It was boring. It was bureaucratic. It was devoid of emotion, and it was lethal. By using words like compliance dispute and vendor identities, I wasn't sounding like a jealous sister. I sounded like a bank, and people do not gossip about banks. They fear them. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was the owner of Juniper and Lace. I expected her to be furious that I had tagged her business in a post about a dispute. I expected her to demand I take it down. "Ms. Lopez," she said. Her voice was steady. "I saw your post. I waited." "Thank you," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me? I have been in this industry for 15 years," she continued. 2 years ago, I had a father of the bride do exactly what your father is doing. He funneled money out of the budget to pay his gambling debts. And when the checks bounced, he blamed me. He ruined my reputation in that town. I lost 6 months of business." She took a breath. "I looked at the affidavit you sent. I looked at the metadata on that signature. I know exactly what is happening here, and I'm not going to let them paint you as the villain while they use my business to launder money." I felt a knot in my chest loosen. I had expected to fight this war alone. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "I am issuing a statement," she said. "Juniper and Lace stands with ethical billing practices. We are freezing all coordination until the financial discrepancies originating from the host party are resolved. I am not canceling, Everly. I am pausing for integrity." She emphasized the word. That afternoon, the narrative shifted. The comments on the Gazette article stopped being about my jealousy and started asking why a professional wedding planner was talking about integrity issues. The word fraud began to appear in the threads. Mara Keene and I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting the demand letter. This was not an email. This was a physical document, printed on heavy bond paper with the Orchid Harbor Capital letterhead. It outlined the $60,000. It outlined the $12,000 redirected to Crown and Coyle, and it added a new figure, $4,500 in legal and forensic investigation fees. Failure to remit the full amount of the unauthorized transfer within 48 hours will result in the immediate filing of a civil suit for conversion. Fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The letter read, "We sent it via courier. It would arrive at my parents' house during dinner, at the same time." The war inside the house was escalating. Delaney was texting me from the bathroom. "Grant is losing it. He just screamed at me in the kitchen. He told me to go on Facebook and write a post saying you are lying. He said if I loved him, I would fix this." "What did you say?" I texted back. I told him I would write the post as soon as he showed me the bank statements for Crown and Coyle. I smiled. My sister was learning. But the final blow didn't come from me. And it didn't come from the planner. It came from the one place my father valued above all else, his own ego. That evening, my parents were hosting a small gathering for the out-of-town relatives who had arrived early. My Aunt Sarah, a sharp-eyed woman who ran a real estate empire in Florida, was there, according to Delaney. My father was holding court in the living room, pouring scotch and playing the victim. "Everly is just difficult," he was saying. loud enough for the whole room to hear. She has always been jealous of Delaney. You know how it is. She has a little job in the city, pushes some papers around, checks boxes. She thinks that gives her the right to dictate how we spend our money. She is just a paper pusher with a superiority complex. The room murmured sympathetically. Poor Everly. Sad. Bitter Everly. Then, Aunt Sarah pulled out her iPad. Actually, Bob, she said, her voice cutting through the murmur. I don't think she is just pushing papers. My father frowned. What are you talking about? Sarah turned the screen around. I was just looking her up. She said, because I wanted to see where she was working. Did you know she was featured in Financial Compliance Weekly last month? She tapped the screen. It was an interview I had done regarding the implementation of AI in detecting corporate embezzlement. The headline read, The Gatekeeper, How Everly Lopez Saved Orchid Harbor Capital from a $50 million liability. The room went silent. $50 million? A cousin asked, eyes wide. Sarah scrolled down. It says here she is the youngest director in the firm's history. She read, It says she manages a team of 40 investigators and has full signatory authority on risk assessments for mergers up to $2 billion. She looked up at my father over her reading glasses. Bob, she said, her tone dry, your daughter isn't a paper pusher, she is a shark. And if she froze your accounts, it isn't because she is jealous. It is because she found something. My father turned a deep, bruised purple. He tried to laugh it off. Oh, that is just industry fluff. You know how magazines exaggerate. But the air in the room had changed. The relatives were looking at him differently. They were looking at him with the sudden, uncomfortable realization that he was lying. They knew my father bragged about everything. If I was really that successful, he should have been boasting about it. The fact that he was diminishing me meant he was afraid of me. Delaney told me later that the party ended early. The guests made excuses and left. The story of the jealous sister had evaporated, replaced by the much more intriguing story of the lying father. I sat in my apartment that night, looking at the city lights. I realized then that reputation is not built on what you say about yourself. It is built on what you can prove. My father had stories. I had receipts. And in the end, the truth is the only currency that doesn't depreciate. The morning after the demand letter arrived, Delaney came to my apartment. She did not look like a bride 3 days out from her wedding. She looked like someone who had just survived a natural disaster and was surveying the wreckage to see what could be salvaged. She sat on my beige sofa, her knees pulled up to her chest, holding a mug of tea she hadn't taken a sip of in 20 minutes. I do not think I want to do this, she said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the hysteria that had defined the last week. I do not mean the fraud, Everly. I mean I do not know if I want to marry him. I sat down opposite her. The air in the room was still. If you want to walk away, I said, we walk away. I will call the vendors. I will absorb the cancellation fees. You can stay here. She shook her head slowly. If I cancel now, she said, they win. Mom and Dad will spin it that I was unstable. Grant will say I got cold feet, and he is the victim. I will be the girl who fell apart. I do not want to be that girl anymore. She looked up at me. I want to finish it, but I want to finish it on my terms. I want a ceremony, but I do not want their circus. I understood. She didn't want a wedding. She wanted a reclamation. Okay, I said. I pulled out my tablet. We pivot. We cancel the ballroom at the country club. It is too big, too loud, and frankly, too compromised. I pulled up the listing for the Marrow House Conservatory. It was a smaller venue, an architectural glass house filled with rare botanicals. It was stark, elegant, and completely transparent, a fitting metaphor for what we were trying to achieve. We move it here, I said. We cut the guest list from 200 people to 50. Just the people who actually know your middle name. And the money? She asked. I looked her in the eye. I will release the remaining escrow funds directly to the new vendors. I said, not a cent goes through Mom, Dad, or Grant's shell company. I pay the conservatory, I pay the caterer, I pay the florist. Direct deposit only. But, I added, there are conditions. I laid out the terms I had drafted with Mara. They were brutal, but necessary. First, Mom and Dad had to sign a repayment agreement for the $12,000 they had diverted. I wasn't asking for the cash immediately. I knew they didn't have it, but I wanted a legal acknowledgement of the debt. Second, Grant had to sign a full financial disclosure and a prenuptial agreement. If he was truly marrying her for love, protecting her assets shouldn't be a problem. And third, they had to issue a correction. A written statement to the family that the $60,000 came from me. Not from the family estate. Delaney took the tablet. She stared at the picture of the glass house. Do it, she said. The next 24 hours were a blur of negotiations. When I presented the terms to my parents, the outrage was predictable. My father shouted about disrespect. My mother cried about how I was humiliating them. I waited them out. You have two choices. I told them on speakerphone, you sign the agreement, and we have a beautiful, intimate wedding at the conservatory that saves your public image. Or, I file the lawsuit for conversion on Monday morning, and the headline in the Gazette changes from vendor snags to local father sued for daughter's wedding fund fraud. They signed. They signed with shaking hands and hateful eyes. But they signed. Grant was harder. When Delaney presented the prenup and the debt disclosure, he exploded. I wasn't there, but Delaney told me he paced around their living room, accusing her of not trusting him, of letting her bitter sister poison their relationship. But he signed too. Why? Because without the wedding going forward, he had no access to the social capital he needed to impress his own investors. He needed the show to go on. The twist came on Friday night. I was at the conservatory, doing a final walkthrough with the new site manager. When Delaney walked in, she was holding a piece of paper. What is that? I asked. She held it out to me. It was a document I hadn't drafted. Mom gave it to me this morning, Delaney said. She said it was just a formality. She said that since they agreed to the repayment plan, I needed to sign this to balance the books for their accountant. I took the paper. It was titled, Gift Confirmation and Liability Release. The text was slippery. It stated that the $12,000 sent to Crown and Coyle was a discretionary gift from the bride, retroactively approved, and that the signers released all parties from any claims of mismanagement. It was a trap. If Delaney signed this, my lawsuit would be dead in the water. It would absolve them of the fraud. It would make the theft legal. They tried to trick you, I said, my voice cold. Even now. Even after everything, they tried to slip this past you to save their own skins. Delaney looked at the glass walls of the venue. The setting sun was turning the room into a cage of gold and fire. I didn't sign it, she said. She took the paper from my hand and ripped it in half. Then she ripped it again. She turned to me, and her eyes were clear. I stand with you. Everly, she said. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was the first time in my life that a family member had chosen me over the path of least resistance. I am not asking you to hate them, Delaney, I said gently. They are still your parents. You do not have to cut them off. No, she said, but I have to cut off the part of me that needs them to be good people, because they aren't. They are just people who want things. She looked down at the torn paper. And Grant. She paused. He asked me if the remaining escrow money could be used to pay off the consulting fee to his cousin before we paid the caterer. He is about to get married, and he is worried about his cousin getting paid. He showed you who he is. I said, yes, she replied. He cares more about the cash flow than he cares about the bride. She took a deep breath and smoothed down her skirt. Everly, I am going to walk down that aisle tomorrow. I looked at her, surprised. You are? Yes, she said, but not to marry him. She didn't explain. She just looked at me with a terrifying resolve. I need you to promise me something, she said. Anything. Tomorrow. When we are at the altar, do not intervene. No matter what happens, just let me speak. I promised. I said. She hugged me then. It wasn't the desperate hug of the girl in the coffee shop. It was the embrace of a woman who was about to detonate a bomb and wanted to say goodbye to the only person she knew would survive the blast. I watched her walk out of the glass house. She was going to a rehearsal dinner for a wedding she knew was a sham. She was walking into a room full of liars, armed with nothing but the truth I had helped her find. I looked at the shredded document on the floor. The trap had failed, and tomorrow, the trap would snap shut on the people who had set it. The Marrow House Conservatory was a structure made entirely of glass and steel, a transparent jewel box set against the backdrop of the city skyline. It was the antithesis of the country club ballroom my parents had originally booked. There were no heavy curtains to hide behind, no dark corners for secrets. Everything here was exposed to the light. The guest list had been ruthlessly pruned. Gone were my father's golf partners and my mother's garden club rivals. The 50 people sitting on the ghost chairs were the ones who actually knew Delaney's middle name. The friends who had held her hair back after college parties, the cousins who didn't care about our bank accounts. My parents arrived with the swagger of conquerors. My father adjusted his silk tie, nodding at the guests with a benevolent smile, clearly believing he had successfully navigated the storm. My mother gripped her clutch, a bag that probably cost more than my first car, and whispered instructions to the ushers. In their minds, they had won. They had signed some papers, yes, but they were still the parents of the bride. They were still the hosts. They believed the narrative of the generous family was still intact. Grant stood at the altar. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. He wasn't nervous about the vows. He was nervous about the wire transfer. He was waiting for the moment the I do unlocked the rest of the escrow account, the money he needed to save his drowning company. I stood in the front row. I was not wearing a bridesmaid dress. I was wearing a sharp slate gray suit. I wasn't there to stand up for the groom. I was there to stand witness for my sister. The string quartet faded into silence. The heavy glass doors opened. Delaney walked in. She was not wearing a veil. Her face was bare, scrubbed clean of the heavy contouring makeup my mother loved. She walked down the aisle alone. My father had tried to take her arm at the entrance, to walk her down and give her away, but she had gently, firmly removed his hand. The guests murmured as she walked solo. My mother let out a gasp that sounded like a tire deflating. Delaney reached the altar. She didn't look at Grant. She turned and faced the audience. "Please, everyone, keep your seats," she said. Her voice was steady, amplified by the acoustics of the glass room. Grant stepped forward, smiling nervously. "Sweetheart, the officiant is ready." Delaney held up a hand. "There will be no officiant today," she said. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. "There will be no wedding today," Delaney continued, "but there will be a ceremony. A ceremony of truth." She looked directly at me in the front row. "First, I need to apologize to my sister. Everly." My mother stood up halfway. "Delaney, sit down. You are hysterical." Delaney didn't flinch. "For months, I let you believe that our parents were paying for this wedding," she said, her voice ringing out. "I let you believe that the $60,000 making this day possible came from a family fund. It did not. Every flower, every chair, every glass of champagne you see today was paid for by Everly." A ripple of shock went through the room. My father turned a shade of purple I had never seen before, and when you heard that Everly was uninvited, Delaney went on, "You were told it was because she was difficult. You were told she was jealous. That was a lie. She turned to face our parents. She was uninvited because she found out that you were stealing from her." Grant lunged for the microphone. "Delaney, stop this. You are stressed." Delaney stepped back, out of his reach. "I am not stressed." "Grant," she said coldly, "I am informed. I know about Crown and Coyle Consulting. I know about the $12,000 you and my parents tried to funnel out of the budget to pay off your business debts." The room erupted. People were standing up. My Aunt Sarah was staring at my father with her mouth open. Grant looked like he had been shot. "Who told you I signed the affidavit?" "Grant," Delaney said, The one Everly sent. But I didn't just sign it. I read it. And then I read the prenuptial agreement you signed yesterday. The one where you admitted your company is insolvent. She looked at him with a pity that was worse than anger. You didn't want a wife, Grant. You wanted a bailout. My father was now shouting, trying to regain control of the room. This is ridiculous. Everly put her up to this. This is financial manipulation. That was the cue. At the back of the room, Mara Keene stepped forward. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was dressed as a guest, but she was carrying a very familiar manila envelope. Mr. Lopez, Mara said, her voice cutting through the noise. As per the agreement you signed 48 hours ago to avoid immediate litigation, you admitted to the misappropriation of funds. Since the wedding is now officially canceled, the terms of the repayment clause are active immediately. My father froze. He looked at Mara, then at me. He realized the trap he had walked into. He had signed the repayment agreement thinking the wedding would go on, and he could pay it back slowly, or perhaps hide it in the gift shuffling. He didn't realize that by signing, he had created a confession that was now public record. My mother was sobbing, clutching Grant's arm. Grant pulled away from her, realizing the ship was sinking and he didn't want to be dragged down with the captain. Delaney turned back to the guests. I am sorry to waste your afternoon, she said. But I could not start my life with a lie. Please enjoy the reception. The food is paid for. The music is paid for. And it was all paid for by the only person in this family who actually knows the value of $1. She walked down the steps of the altar. She didn't walk toward the exit. She walked toward me. The room parted for her. My parents were standing there, stripped of their armor. The generous host mask was gone, replaced by the ugly, panicked faces of people who had been caught red-handed. Everly. My father hissed as I stood up. You did this. You destroyed this family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a transaction on a recorded line. I didn't do anything. Dad. I said, I just balanced the ledger. I pointed to the envelope in Mara's hand. You owe the account $60,000 plus legal fees. We will expect the first installment on Monday. But my mother stammered. Our reputation. What will people say? I leaned in close. They will say exactly what you taught them to say. Mom. They will say, you get what you pay for, and you paid for nothing. I turned to Delaney. She looked exhausted, but she looked free. Her shoulders were down. Her eyes were dry. Ready? I asked. She nodded. I put my arm around her, not as a crutch, but as a shield. Grant was standing alone at the altar, watching his investors and his credibility walk out the door. My parents were being cornered by Aunt Sarah, who looked ready to conduct her own interrogation. We walked out of the glass house and into the cool evening air. I didn't feel triumphant. Victory implies a game, and this wasn't a game. It was a correction. I didn't take the money back to win. I said quietly to Delaney as we walked toward the car. I took my name back. Delaney rested her head on my shoulder. I know, she said. And you gave me mine back, too. We drove away from the Marrow house, leaving the chaos behind in the glass box. My parents would have to sell the summer house to pay me back. Grant would likely face bankruptcy. The gossip would last for years. But as I looked at my sister, watching the city lights blur past the window, I knew we would be fine. We were the Lopez sisters. One of us could read the fine print, and the other finally had the courage to sign on the dotted line. And for the first time in history, the account was closed, and the balance was zero. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, receipts, and sisterhood. If you are listening to this, please comment below and tell me where you are tuning in from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories. Smash that like button and hit the notification bell to help this story get heard by more people who need to know that sometimes the best revenge is just checking the bank statement. See you in the next story.